Before we get into my story, tell me where in the world you're watching this from. I love seeing how far these stories reach. Now buckle up, because what started with me turning off my own water on my own ranch, ended with cops storming my land, HOA lies, and one Karen who thought she could get me arrested. She messed with the wrong rancher. Let me take you to the beginning. HOA Karen calls 911 on me after I turn off my water, wants me arrested on my ranch. The first time I realized something was wrong was when I saw water trickling down the gravel slope behind the barn, on a dry morning, with no rain for days. My name's Cole Danvers, and I've lived on this 40-acre ranch in Texas for most of my life. Built it from nothing. But nothing prepared me for what was about to unfold with the HOA that should have never had jurisdiction over my land. You see, 6 months ago, a luxury subdivision popped up just past the ridge, glass balconies, Teslas, perfectly trimmed shrubs. And right behind them, a new HOA board, drunk with power and eager to beautify the region. They tried to buy a portion of my land. I refused. That's when the game started. At first it was small stuff, anonymous complaints about my livestock, a notice about unauthorized structures, aka my shed that's been there since '03. I laughed it off. But that morning, seeing the water line hissing like a vein under pressure, I followed the piping back toward the ridge. And what I found had me clenching my fists. Someone had spliced into my underground water system, my well, paid for and drilled with my money, and was redirecting gallons uphill toward the new homes. I was being robbed, and I didn't even know it until then. I didn't call a lawyer. I didn't raise hell. I just turned the valve off. Cut their illegal line dead. The pressure dropped instantly, and the whine of the motor up at their hilltop homes went silent. I walked back to the barn, poured myself coffee, and waited. Less than an hour later, a white Lexus SUV came barreling down my driveway like it owned the gravel. And out stepped the woman I'd heard the neighbors whisper about, tight sunglasses, gold necklace bouncing on her neck, and the kind of rage only someone truly entitled could wear proudly. "You turned off our water," she snapped, storming toward me like I was her gardener. I calmly reminded her this was my land and my well. Her response: "That's not your decision to make anymore." I should have known right then this wasn't over. But I wasn't expecting what happened next. As I turned back toward my porch, she pulled out her phone and dialed 911. "Yes," she said, loud enough for me to hear. "I'm on Karen Creek Ranch Road. There's a man threatening my property, and he shut off our water supply. I believe he's dangerous." I laughed, until I realized she wasn't bluffing. She was weaponizing the system against me. Minutes later, I heard the distant whir of sirens slicing through the rural silence. And for the first time in 20 years, I braced myself for a police confrontation on the land I built with my own hands. I had no idea just how deep her power ran. The flashing red and blue lights painted the oak trees like a carnival gone wrong. 2 patrol cars kicked up dust as they stopped at the foot of my porch. I stood firm with a mug in my hand, watching them like I'd watched coyotes circling my cattle before. Karen, the woman with the Lexus and a tongue sharper than barbed wire, rushed to meet them, pointing frantically in my direction. "That's him," she shouted. "He shut off our water and made threats." I didn't move. I let her lie. Let her dig. The officers, both young and clearly unfamiliar with this kind of nonsense, looked confused as they approached. "You Cole Danvers?" the taller one asked. I nodded. "Mind telling us what's going on?" "Sure," I said, stepping off the porch. "I own this ranch. That woman's HOA tapped into my private water line without permission. I shut it off, because it's mine. No one threatened anyone. If anything, she's trespassing." The second officer glanced at Karen, then at a folded piece of paper she was now waving like a spell scroll. "We have a water distribution agreement with the county," she yelled. "He's interfering with essential services." I felt my blood boil. There was no agreement. No county-backed anything. But I knew then, I was dealing with a woman who didn't just lie, she built castles out of them. The shorter officer walked to the back of my barn while the tall one stayed with me. "Is your well registered?" he asked. "Yes," I answered, pulling my documents from the folder I always kept in the house, deeds, permits, everything. "Drilled in 2009, paid in full. Serves this ranch only. Never agreed to share a drop with anyone." By the time his partner returned, Karen's shouting had reached fever pitch. "He has weapons inside. I'm telling you," I felt threatened. That was it. I knew where this was going. I wasn't just fighting theft. I was fighting a woman willing to see me dragged off my own land in handcuffs because she didn't like being told no. The deputy returned with wide eyes. "Found the cutoff valve," he said. "It's on his side. Clearly separate from the subdivision. Doesn't even connect to their infrastructure." But Karen wasn't letting go. "You need to arrest him," she insisted. "He endangered our families by interrupting the flow." I looked at the officers, calm but firm. "You're standing on my well-fed ground, gentlemen. If anyone's endangering anyone, it's her. She's been stealing my water. I want a report filed, for trespassing, for theft, and for harassment." That hit a nerve. Karen spun on me, her face red with fury. "This isn't over," she barked, storming back to her SUV. But before she left, she handed one of the deputies a legal-looking envelope. "Then maybe the court will explain it to him," she sneered. The officer passed it to me with a raised brow. I opened it slowly, and my stomach twisted at what I saw. A cease and desist letter, claiming the HOA had rights to my well based on an obscure zoning loophole tied to a decades-old land easement. My land. My well. My water. And now, apparently, their rules. I stood there as the dust settled around her retreating vehicle, gripping that paper like it was poison. "My name is Cole Danvers. And they were about to find out I'm not the kind of man you steal from. Not without consequences." I didn't sleep that night. I walked the perimeter of my ranch with a flashlight and a loaded .22 slung over my shoulder. It wasn't just paranoia. Karen's 911 stunt proved she'd do anything to intimidate me, even get the law involved with no proof. And now with that cease and desist letter in my hand, I knew this was more than an entitled neighbor overstepping. It was premeditated. I'd heard rumors from a rancher a few ridges over, that this HOA had been quietly acquiring access to land rights by exploiting buried easements most people didn't know existed. But I did. And unlike them, I read every square inch of my deed. The next morning, I drove to the county recorder's office with my papers and a thermos of black coffee. Miss Ellison, the woman behind the desk, had worked there for 40 years. She remembered my grandfather. When I showed her the letter from the HOA's legal team, she gave me a look like she'd just sniffed cow manure. "This isn't even binding," she said, adjusting her glasses. "They're bluffing." But, she paused, flipping through microfiche like a surgeon. There was an easement filed back in '88, gave limited access to the land that became the subdivision. But not water. Strictly surface access for a now-defunct cattle trail. That's all I needed to hear. Back home, I traced the piping they'd laid underground, cheap PVC, shoddily connected, hidden just beneath the dirt. I cut every inch of it out. Clean. Then I called my buddy Jasper, a contractor who owed me a favor. "Think you can dig me a trench and lay some security fencing, real quiet?" I asked. He chuckled. "You got HOA problems again?" "Bigger than ever," I said. "And this time, I want it done with concrete barriers, not just stakes and tape." If they were going to pretend this was their water supply, I was going to bury that lie 6 feet deep, literally. 3 days later, while Karen and her HOA board were busy filing another complaint to the city, I had crews trenching the hill and installing cameras. The new fencing cut a clean line between my ranch and their homes. It wasn't just about property now. It was about proving intent. I wanted video, timestamps, movement logs, anything to show they were still accessing my well illegally. Because I had a plan. And it started with letting them keep digging their own grave. By the weekend, the first footage came in. A man in a reflective HOA vest, with a clipboard and bolt cutters, ducking under the fencing and fiddling with the same line I'd already sealed. He didn't know it yet, but the moment he stepped onto my land, he triggered 3 motion sensors and 2 cameras with full audio. I could hear him muttering, "She said it'd be quick, get the line back before the ranch guy notices." I smiled. Karen thought she was clever, hiding behind legal jargon and panic calls. But what she didn't realize was that I wasn't just defending my water anymore. I was building a case. I wanted every judge in Texas to see the truth when I took her to court. And when they did, I wanted her name attached to it forever. By Monday, I'd already made 3 copies of the footage, one for my lawyer, one for the sheriff's department, and one I kept, just in case Karen decided to lose anything in the legal shuffle. I didn't trust her, not with the way she smiled through her teeth like she was above consequence. So I set a meeting with Sheriff Briggs, an old-school lawman who'd known my father. He showed up in his beat-up pickup wearing boots older than most of the HOA board members combined. As soon as I played him the footage, he let out a low whistle. "Well, hell," he muttered, sipping his gas station coffee. "That's trespassing, tampering with private infrastructure, and illegal modification of utility lines." He leaned back. "You sure you want to take this to court, Cole? Could be messy. Folks like this, they don't play fair." I looked him in the eye. "I don't need fair. I need right." Briggs nodded slowly and handed me a form. "Let's file it officially then. I'll open an investigation and question them myself. But you better be ready. People like her. When you corner them, they don't go down quiet." The next day, the sheriff's cruiser was spotted at the HOA office in their clubhouse. Karen must have seen it coming because she'd already called an emergency board meeting. According to a neighbor I trusted, she was trying to get the HOA to countersue me for deliberate sabotage of communal infrastructure. That was rich, like a burglar suing because they tripped on your fence. But I knew what she was really doing: stalling, creating noise, making this as public and uncomfortable for me as possible. She wanted me to flinch. But I didn't. Instead, I played the long game. I printed out notices of trespass and had them certified and delivered to every HOA member I could identify from footage. I posted signs at every fence line: private ranch property. Trespassers will be prosecuted. Not HOA land. I made it unmistakable. Jasper even helped me install a small solar-powered speaker at the corner nearest their path. When anyone crossed it, a pre-recorded message in my voice said, "You are now trespassing on Danvers Ranch. Leave immediately or authorities will be contacted." Karen must have heard it too, because 3 days later, she returned. Only this time, she wasn't yelling. She was smiling. She stepped out of her Lexus slowly, holding something behind her back. "I think we got off on the wrong foot," she purred. I didn't say a word. "Let's talk about making this disappear. You give us back access to the well. We drop all legal threats." I raised an eyebrow. "That's not how this works, ma'am." She took another step forward. "Then how about a donation? Your ranch needs maintenance, right? We could make it worth your while." I smiled, too. But mine wasn't friendly. "I've already filed charges. I have your voice on tape. You're people on my land. You came here thinking I'd sell you my water," I said. "But you made one mistake, Karen, you tried to take it before offering a deal." Her smile dropped, replaced with something colder. "You're making enemies you can't afford, Mr. Danvers." I tipped my hat. "Lady, I've faced droughts, wildfires, and snakes with better manners than you. I'll be just fine." And with that, she drove off, tires spinning, ego bruised. A week passed without a peep from Karen or her minions, and I started thinking maybe they were backing off. Sheriff Briggs had questioned 2 HOA members, and according to him, their stories didn't match. The county was now looking into their zoning filings. Meanwhile, I kept upgrading security, fencing reinforced, motion cameras replaced with night vision ones, and the audio system expanded to cover more ground. But just when the dust began to settle, I received a letter in the mail that made my blood run cold. You are hereby summoned to attend a joint community board hearing regarding municipal water access, property compliance, and neighborhood cooperation. It was signed by Karen herself. But worse, it had the seal of the county commissioner. I knew this wasn't just HOA pettiness anymore. Karen had gone above me, likely used her connections, her husband's legal firm, or some donation money to pull political strings. They were going to make this look like I was the problem, a stubborn old rancher hoarding water in a community facing shortages. And if I didn't show up, they'd claim I was refusing peaceful resolution. I showed the letter to Briggs. He grunted. Looks like they want a public spectacle, he said. Good news is, I'll be there. As will the county clerk who confirmed your land rights. They try anything slick, we shut it down. The hearing was scheduled at the community center on a Saturday morning. I cleaned up, wore jeans without rips, a flannel shirt, and my cleanest boots. But I didn't come alone. My lawyer, Ben, came with a thick binder full of documentation. And so did Jasper, who'd printed surveillance stills and brought a USB loaded with video. As we walked in, the room went dead quiet. HOA members on one side, county officials at the front, and Karen, center stage, looking like a smug lioness waiting for the kill. The meeting opened with Karen delivering a rehearsed speech about community sustainability, regional growth, and uncooperative landowners. She painted a picture of me as a bitter recluse hoarding water during a dry season. People clapped. The commissioner nodded. Then it was my turn. Ben stood first and laid down the legal foundation, my well registration, the easement limitations, and the trespassing evidence. Then he played a clip of the HOA guy whispering, she said it'd be quick, that turned heads. People started murmuring. Then I stood up. My name is Cole Danvers. My family's lived on that land since 1971. I built that well with my own hands, for my animals, my crops, and my life. I didn't cut off a community. I cut off thieves. Then I held up the cease and desist letter. This document is a lie. This isn't cooperation, it's coercion. I looked directly at the commissioner. This is a coordinated attempt to override rural ownership with suburban politics. And I won't be intimidated. The room went silent. Until one older man in the back, turns out he was a former judge, stood and said, that well belongs to him. I reviewed the easement 20 years ago. This whole show is a disgrace. Karen's face froze. For the first time, I saw panic behind her designer glasses. You'd think after a public humiliation like that, Karen and her HOA goons would retreat. But entitlement doesn't know when to quit. 3 days after the hearing, just as the sun was setting behind the ridge, I noticed a glint near the back line of my property. I grabbed my binoculars and scanned the tree line. 2 figures in neon vests, no markings, just generic gear, were crouched near one of my water tanks. I knew that posture. They weren't inspecting. They were tampering. I grabbed my rifle, not to shoot, just to show I meant business, and rode up the trail on my ATV. The moment they saw me coming, they took off, crashing through brush like scared dogs. But I caught enough on my body cam to make it count. One had a clipboard. The other had bolt cutters. They were trying to reroute the system again. This wasn't just Karen being annoying anymore. This was sabotage. And it was escalation. I sent the footage to Briggs and my lawyer. Briggs called me back 2 hours later. One of them's from a landscaping firm on Karen's HOA payroll. Not licensed for utility work. The other, we're still identifying. I asked what I could do legally. He said, file for a restraining order and press criminal charges. You've got the proof. But be warned, Cole, they're poking the bear because they're getting desperate. Desperate is right. The next day, I woke to find one of my pipes had been smashed clean through. My cattle troughs were dry. I had to drag in a backup tank just to keep them hydrated. It took hours. And when I checked the footage again, I saw it. A man in a gray hoodie, face obscured, walked right up to the line at 2 a.m. and took a crowbar to it. On my land. While I slept. That's when I made my decision. If they wanted war, I'd give them one. But not with threats, not with noise. I'd do it the way my grandfather taught me, with patience, precision, and proof. I hired a private investigator to dig into Karen's real estate filings, her husband's firm, and the HOA's financial books. If they'd done this to me, chances are they'd done it to someone else. I wanted leverage. And I wanted it before the next board meeting. Because that's where I'd bring everything to light. Meanwhile, I reinforced the broken line with steel casing, installed underground sensors, and set up a small drone that patrolled the perimeter at night. They thought I'd break under pressure. They didn't realize, I live for this kind of pressure. When the private investigator called back 2 nights later, his words lit a fire in me. Cole, you're gonna want to sit down. I found something about Karen's HOA, and it ain't just about water. It's fraud. A lot of it. I was sitting on my porch when the call came in, nursing a bitter cup of coffee as the sun dipped low. The investigator, Tommy Rayburn, a quiet but ruthless bloodhound, had been digging for barely a week, but his voice now carried a tremble of urgency. Cole, this HOA. It's not just stealing water. They've been falsifying infrastructure reports to the county, inflating costs on maintenance projects, and funneling the difference into a dummy account. Guess whose name shows up on the withdrawals? I didn't even need to guess. Karen. I said. Karen Davis, he confirmed. And her husband, Douglas. I've got statements, email chains, and a paper trail a mile long. I leaned back in my chair, staring out across my quiet, dusty land. I had known Karen was crooked, but this was enough to bury her HOA under a courthouse. But I didn't want to just hand it off to the sheriff. Not yet. This had to be public. She tried to ruin my name, trespassed, lied to police, manipulated officials, and now she was stealing from her own people. No, she deserved to fall in front of them, to taste the same shame she served with a smile. I met with Tommy in town the next day. He handed me a flash drive and a thick folder labeled Davis Scheme. Inside were HOA meeting minutes that had been forged, building permit receipts that didn't match actual work done, and contractor payments made to companies that didn't exist. Fake landscaping. Fake plumbing. All real money. She's been bleeding them dry for 3 years, Tommy said. Used HOA fees to pay for her lake house. You want the HOA board to see this, time it right, next public meetings in 4 days. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I spent hours creating a presentation. Simple slides. Bullet points. Surveillance stills. Bank receipts. I labeled it, the cost of control. Then I made one last move. I invited the local newspaper to attend the meeting. Told them they might want to bring a photographer. And just for insurance, I uploaded the whole thing to a private server with instructions for it to be published publicly if anything happened to me. Karen played dirty. I wasn't going to leave any door unlocked. Saturday came fast. I dressed the same way I did last time, boots polished, shirt tucked in, every document tucked under my arm like a rifle. The room was more crowded this time. Word had gotten around. Some came out of curiosity, others out of anger. Karen stood at the front, visibly rattled. She was trying to rally them again, playing the same script: he's endangering the community, he's dividing us, this rancher is toxic. But halfway through her speech, I stood up and walked to the projector. Without asking for permission, I connected the flash drive. The title screen popped up, The Cost of Control, by Cole Danvers. Karen froze. "What do you think you're doing?" she hissed. "Showing the truth," I said. Then I clicked the first slide. The projector screen lit up like a beacon in the middle of the HOA clubhouse. Every eye turned from Karen to me as I stood there, one finger on the clicker, voice calm but sharp as broken glass. "You've all been asking why this water issue matters so much," I began. "But what you don't know is that it was never about water. It was about control. And money. Your money." I clicked the next slide. On screen appeared an invoice, $14,800 for HOA sidewalk repair, paid to a company called Blue Rock LLC. Then another slide, a state registry search showing no such company ever existed. The room started murmuring. A woman in the back gasped. I moved on. "Here's a payment of $11,200 for drainage inspection, same ghost company. And here," I clicked again, "are the bank withdrawal records. The name on the account? Karen Davis." Karen tried to stand, but someone near her pulled her back down. "Let him finish," the man snapped. It was the same retired judge who'd spoken up at the last meeting. "We need to hear this." I stepped aside and let the next few slides play automatically. Audio clips, all captured legally, HOA members discussing forged votes. Karen giving instructions to override zoning concerns. One of her board members laughing about double billing the landscaping budget. Each word hammered the room like nails in a coffin. Then came the killer, the footage of her contractors trespassing on my land, Karen's voice saying, "He won't even notice if we tap it quietly." When the lights came back on, no one clapped. No one yelled. They just stared at her. "This is a smear campaign," she shrieked. "He's falsifying everything. You can't trust this man, he's a rancher." But no one moved. She stood alone in the center of a storm she built herself, her face red, her voice cracking. "You all believe him over me? After everything I've done for this neighborhood?" A woman near the front stood and said, "You mean like stealing from us?" That was it. The floodgate opened. HOA members shouted over each other, demanding audits, demanding her resignation, demanding law enforcement. Karen tried to escape through the back door, but two members blocked her. "You'll sit down until the sheriff arrives," one said. I stood back and watched the implosion, arms folded, heart thudding with something I hadn't felt in weeks: peace. Sheriff Briggs arrived 15 minutes later. Walked in like he owned the place. "Karen Davis," he said. "You're being detained for questioning under suspicion of fraud, embezzlement, and criminal trespass." The crowd parted like the Red Sea. She turned to me, eyes burning. "You think you've won?" she whispered. "You think this ends here?" I met her stare. "Oh no," I said. "This is just the part where you pay." And just like that, they led her out, no cuffs, not yet, but her hands were trembling like she already felt the weight. With Karen gone and the HOA board in tatters, I expected life on my ranch to return to normal. For the first time in weeks, the water flowed quietly without sudden drops in pressure or new leaks. The troughs were full, the fences stood tall, and the only thing on my land making noise was the wind. Sheriff Briggs called 2 days after the meeting to confirm what I already suspected: Karen had been officially charged. 3 counts of fraud. 1 count of criminal trespassing. And they were investigating potential conspiracy charges linked to 2 other HOA officers. But despite the public collapse, I couldn't shake the feeling it wasn't over. That feeling was confirmed when I found a manila envelope zip-tied to my front gate. There was no note, no return address, just a stack of county development plans, including one showing a proposed pipeline expansion cutting straight through my ranch. It wasn't dated yet, but the blueprints were real. And at the bottom was a signature, Douglas R. Davis, Karen's husband. Turns out while Karen had been the face of the HOA scheme, Douglas was already playing a longer game. He worked in real estate law and had been trying to push a new district rezoning proposal through the county, a pipeline that would override local landholder rights. If passed, it wouldn't matter what Karen had done. My well, my land, my fences. All could be condemned for public use. I called Ben, my lawyer, immediately. "This is the next move," I said. "They're not coming with bolt cutters anymore. They're coming with permits." Ben sighed. "I'll start drafting a defense, but if this gets into political hands, we need to go public again, maybe louder than last time." So I made a decision. I called up the local news station that had covered the HOA collapse and offered them an exclusive. I walked them through the land, showed them the pipeline map, explained the history of the well, the sabotage, the courtroom tactics. This time, they brought cameras. Drones. The headline that aired that night? "From victim to vigilante, rancher battles HOA, now faces corporate land grab." The story went viral, shared by ranchers across the state, then picked up nationally. People called in from California, Wyoming, even Canada. Landowners who'd fought similar battles. Some had lost. Some had won. But all of them knew one thing: once your water gets targeted, your freedom isn't far behind. By the weekend, I had petitions on my porch, attorneys offering help for free, and environmental activists asking if they could camp near my fences, as a statement. I wasn't looking to become a symbol. I just wanted peace. But if they wanted a face for this fight, they had it. My name was Cole Danvers. And I wasn't backing down. Because the water still ran. And now, so would the truth. The day the pipeline permit hearing was scheduled, I wore the same boots I'd poured concrete in 20 years ago, cracked, dust-worn, and heavy as hell. I wasn't dressing for style. I was dressing for war. The county hall was packed when I arrived. News crews lined the steps. Protesters waved cardboard signs. And in the middle of the chaos stood Douglas Davis, suit pressed, sunglasses on, flanked by two sharp-faced lawyers like wolves in tailored wool. If Karen was bold and brash, Douglas was cold and surgical. He didn't even look at me as I passed. Just whispered something to his legal team and smiled. Inside, the proceedings were slick. Douglas's lawyers laid out their case in well-rehearsed bullet points: community growth, infrastructure needs, legal pathways through unused rural zones. They called my well redundant and my ranch underutilized. It was everything they needed to say to get city folks on their side. Then it was my turn. I stood before the council, held up the original deed to my land, and said, "There's nothing unused about a ranch that feeds people and raises life. You want to steal that because it's quiet, not because it's empty." I handed over copies of the fraud report from Karen's case. This permit is being pushed by a man married to a woman currently facing felony charges for trespass and theft on this same land. If this isn't conflict of interest, I don't know what is. The room stirred. I could see two council members shifting uncomfortably. One asked for a recess. It wasn't just my words that hit, it was everything that had come before. The cameras. The truth. The people. They weren't ready for how many were standing with me. When the hearing resumed, I brought out my final card, testimony from two former HOA board members who'd quietly flipped once Karen was indicted. On the record, they stated that Douglas had attended private meetings, directed property acquisition strategies, and used his wife's position as a legal smokescreen. One of them even admitted that the water tap was his idea, but that Douglas had guaranteed it would never be traced back. That was the moment it turned. The commissioner leaned forward and said, "We are halting this permit proposal until a full ethics investigation is completed." Effective immediately. Douglas's mask cracked for the first time. He stood, but didn't speak. His lawyers rushed to his side, whispering damage control. But the cameras were already rolling. The people had seen enough. Outside the courthouse, I gave no speech. I just tipped my hat to the crowd and walked back to my truck. Jasper was leaning against the tailgate with a grin. "You know what they're calling you now?" he asked. "The well defender." I snorted. "Sounds like a cheap superhero." He laughed. "Maybe. But you won today." And I did. But I also knew one thing for sure: snakes don't vanish when you chase them out. They just hide deeper. Just when I thought the fight was over, the darkness crept in, quieter this time, more calculated. Douglas didn't show his face in public again after the ethics investigation was launched. His lawyers went quiet. The HOA board was officially dissolved pending a court-ordered audit. But predators don't stop hunting just because the spotlight's on them, they wait for the lights to go out. And late one night, they did. I woke up to the smell of burning rubber. Outside, the ranch gate was twisted like a pretzel. My mailbox? Gone. And painted across the front of my barn in bold red spray paint were the words, "You'll lose eventually." I didn't need a signature to know where it came from. It wasn't vandalism. It was a message, from someone who thought their power couldn't be broken in a courtroom. Someone who believed intimidation still had a place in a world where justice had started to breathe again. I called the sheriff immediately. Briggs came himself. His face was pale, his jaw tight. "We've seen 3 similar attacks this week," he said. "All on people who testified at your hearing. Looks like someone's trying to clean house before the investigation goes deeper." He put a hand on my shoulder. "You've rattled a nest of snakes, Cole. But they're not slithering anymore, they're striking." We installed floodlights, reinforced the ranch gate with steel, and set cameras to stream to a cloud server. But it wasn't just my property I was worried about now. The neighbor down the ridge, an old widow named Margaret, found her water tank slashed. One of the former HOA whistleblowers had his car keyed from hood to trunk. Jasper even caught someone lurking near the security van he parked on my ranch. These weren't coincidences. They were warnings. So I did what I had to. I organized a town hall. I rented out the old church auditorium and invited everyone, not just the locals, but nearby ranchers, farmers, suburban families fed up with HOA bullying. I stood at the front and said, "This isn't about my well anymore. It's about power. And people like Douglas and Karen thinking they're above the law. They're counting on us being scared. They're counting on us staying quiet." The crowd rose with a roar. Dozens signed a community protection petition that night, demanding increased patrols, surveillance, and legal action against anyone tied to retaliatory harassment. We were no longer individuals on separate acres. We were united. And now, they were the ones on the defensive. But as I drove home that night, headlights in my rearview mirror followed me all the way to my gate, then disappeared the moment I reached for my rifle. The silence that returned wasn't peace. It was the calm before something worse. I smelled the smoke before I saw it. It was just past 4 a.m., the kind of dead hour where even the crickets go quiet. My dogs barked once, then fell silent. That alone told me something was off. I grabbed my boots, threw on a jacket, and stepped outside. The night was still, too still. Then I saw it, orange flickers curling out of the feed barn, licking up the timber like tongues of revenge. My chest tightened. That barn held months of stored hay, feed grain, and the backup generator. But more than that, it held years of memory, tools passed down from my father, old wood carved by my grandfather's hands. I ran toward it, hose already in hand, but it was no use. The fire had been started smart, accelerant soaked and hidden under the feed stacks. It was deliberate. Tactical. I backed off and watched it burn, choking down the rage rising in my throat. Flames hissed and cracked like the devil whispering. By the time the volunteer fire crew got there, half the structure was gone. One of the men walked up to me, eyes grim. No lightning, no sparks, no accident. This was lit, Cole. You've got enemies with no soul. Sheriff Briggs came before dawn. Arson, he confirmed after his team checked the site. Professional, too. No fingerprints. Probably someone hired, not personal. Which means Douglas is digging deep. I nodded, jaw locked. Then it's time I dig deeper. The next day, I handed over the footage from my perimeter cams. It didn't show a face, but it showed a figure. Slim build. Gloved hands. Hooded. A shadow moving like they knew where every blind spot was. Someone had studied my land. Someone who had a reason to cripple me quietly, without drawing court attention. But this time, they messed up. A small mistake. One camera, half buried behind a stack of lumber, caught the figure fleeing, just for a second. But the pickup they climbed into had a dented fender. I froze the frame. That truck looked familiar. And then I remembered, the same fender Jasper pointed out at the HOA hearing, parked behind the clubhouse. It belonged to Ryan Hale, one of Douglas's junior partners, the man who'd handled permits behind the scenes. It was the thread I needed. Ben, my lawyer, took the footage to the DA. The connection was thin, but it was enough to reopen a secondary probe. This wasn't just HOA corruption now. It was conspiracy, property destruction, and retaliation. Felony territory. If I could link Ryan to Douglas, and Douglas to the arson, it'd all come crashing down. But while the evidence stacked up, I couldn't ignore the weight in my chest. My barn was gone. My land had been scarred. I stood in the ashes that night, staring at the blackened timbers under the moonlight, and said out loud, "You picked the wrong man." This wasn't about a water line anymore. It was about legacy. You push a man long enough, burn down his barn, threaten his land, and something shifts inside him. I wasn't just defending property anymore, I was hunting. And when you hunt a predator, you don't chase. You bait. So I set the trap. Jasper and I spent 3 days reconstructing a decoy system on the far edge of the ranch, the old dry well. We wrapped it in fresh PVC, wired it to a solar pump, and even installed a dummy control panel that blinked like a heartbeat at night. It looked like a brand new water source being tested, like maybe I was rerouting the line out of fear. Then I let word slip to a nosy contractor I knew had ties to Ryan Hale. That was all it took. 2 days later, my motion sensors went hot just after midnight. The figure came back, same slim build, same route through the ridge trail. But this time, I was ready. I was watching live from the ranch house, every camera synced to my laptop. The moment he knelt by the dummy well and popped open the fake panel, I activated the secondary lights, motion-triggered flood beams with a high-pitched alarm. The entire clearing lit up like a prison yard. The figure froze, then bolted. But Jasper was waiting at the access road, engine idling, headlights off. We boxed him in, forced him off his bike. I stepped out with my phone filming, said one word, "Ryan." He ripped off the hoodie. It was him, Ryan Hale. Young, slick, and for the first time, terrified. Sheriff Briggs arrived 20 minutes later. Ryan tried to bluff. "I was just checking on a contractor project." Misunderstanding. But we had footage. Prints. Footage from the barn arson that now linked his truck. And then came the biggest twist. When Briggs opened Ryan's glove box, he found a burner phone. Not just calls, but texts. From Douglas. Clear as day. "Hit it tonight. Keep it quiet. No traces back to me." It was the smoking gun. Within 24 hours, a warrant was issued for Douglas Davis. They found him trying to board a private plane out of state. The man who thought he could bury me in paperwork, permits, and sabotage was now handcuffed on the tarmac like a two-bit thief. He didn't even look angry, he looked confused. As if the system he once owned had turned on him. And it had. Because for once, the law didn't bow to power, it bowed to truth. When Sheriff Briggs came by that evening, he said, "You do realize you took down one of the most connected men in this county?" I looked out across the ranch, at the blackened spot where my barn used to be, and nodded. He took something from me. I just returned the favor. But it wasn't over yet. There was one last reckoning ahead. One final meeting. They held the final ethics tribunal at the county courthouse. Not the HOA board. Not a zoning committee. This time, it was the big room, state officials, prosecutors, even a few reporters in the back rows. Karen was there, seated beside a public defender. Her usual designer flair was gone, replaced by a wrinkled blouse and tired eyes. Her hair, once perfectly styled, was pulled back in a limp ponytail. But it was Douglas who drew all eyes. Shackled at the wrists, flanked by U.S. Marshals, he looked like a man who still couldn't believe his own empire had crumbled. I took my seat in the witness box, calm as ever. When they asked me to speak, I kept it plain. They tried to break me. Not just my water. Not just my barn. My legacy. They came with fake permits, lies, sabotage. They used the system like a weapon. I turned my eyes directly to Douglas. And I didn't bend. You could hear a pin drop. Even Karen didn't look at him. She stared straight ahead, like she already knew what was coming. Then the state prosecutor laid out the charges: conspiracy, felony arson, attempted illegal seizure of private land, fraud, and retaliatory harassment. Each one read like a chapter of this story. But what made it powerful wasn't just the evidence, it was the public attention. The cameras. The people in that room who'd watched the viral video of my barn burning, the confrontation at the HOA hearing, the fake invoices, and that final sting at the decoy well. They weren't just hearing the truth. They had seen it. When Douglas was asked to speak, he refused. His lawyer mumbled something about ongoing litigation, but it didn't matter. The damage was done. Karen, however, broke. On the stand, she tried to spin the same story: community growth, misunderstandings, but her voice shook, and her tears couldn't hide the resentment in her eyes. She wasn't sorry. She was cornered. The tribunal's ruling came at the end of the day: all permits tied to Douglas's firm were suspended pending full audits. The HOA was permanently dissolved. Karen was banned from serving in any community leadership role in the state. Ryan Hale was remanded into custody pending sentencing. And Douglas? He was denied bail. Trial to begin in 3 months, facing up to 30 years in federal prison. When it was all over, I walked out into the dusk, the courthouse bathed in golden light. Jasper stood waiting by the truck, arms crossed, grin wide. "So," he said, "does that mean we can finally rebuild your barn?" I looked out at the sky. "Not rebuild," I said. "Raise it. Bigger. Stronger. Just like this land." But there was one last thing I needed to do. A letter I had kept sealed. A truth I had waited to deliver. The ranch had gone quiet again, not the silence of fear, but the silence of peace. My dogs lay under the porch, tail thumping in the dirt. Jasper was out by the east fence post with new lumber, whistling low. The scars from the fire were still visible, but grass had already begun to grow over the black. Life was returning, one stubborn blade at a time. But before I could move on, before I could rebuild fully, I had one last task to finish. It had been sitting in my safe for years, and I knew the time had come to send it. The letter was handwritten by my father before he passed. It was addressed to the county planning office and marked, to be sent if ever challenged. I never really believed I'd need it. But now, after everything, the theft, the fake permits, the arson, the arrests, I knew this wasn't just a final page. It was the epilogue my father had written for a fight he predicted decades ago. I drove it into town myself, handed it to the clerk, and watched her eyes widen as she read the notarized statement. My father had detailed the full history of the well, how it was built with private funds, how the surrounding pipeline agreements were contingent on his original ownership, and, most damning, how he'd purchased a narrow strip of land just past the ridge in secret. That strip? It blocked access to the only legal route the county had for pipeline expansion. My father had predicted exactly what men like Douglas would try. And he'd stopped them from beyond the grave. "You've got a fortress here, Mr. Danvers," the clerk said, handing me back a copy. "Legally and literally." I just smiled. He always did play the long game. That night, I stood where the barn once was, fresh gravel now lining the lot. Jasper had started foundation work. The new building would be bigger, stronger, with steel trusses and a full security bay. But more than that, it would stand as a reminder of what it means to hold your ground. To fight when you have every reason to walk away. To build a legacy that doesn't just survive storms, it buries them. The papers came out the next morning. One headline stuck out. "Rancher who took on HOA now owns the land they tried to steal." I didn't do interviews. I didn't need the spotlight. I had my land. I had my peace. And when the water ran that morning, clear and steady through the pipes I protected, it sounded like freedom. If you're watching this and you've ever been bullied, pushed out, or underestimated, hear this: stand tall. Stay smart. And when the storm comes, let it hit you like a hammer hits an anvil, because that's how steel is made. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments. Tell me, where are you watching from?